Forget everything you've been told about coincidence. It doesn't exist. What you call luck, chance, or funny coincidence is, in fact, the signature of an intelligence that has been working behind the scenes of your life for much longer than you imagine. And most people go through entire decades receiving these signs without ever learning how to read them. They escape death by seconds, meet the right person at the exact moment, feel an impossible peace in the middle of chaos, and then they forget, they move on, they call it luck, and go back to living as if they were completely alone in the world. Today, that changes. Because there is a man who spent his entire life documenting, in a methodical, almost clinical way, the patterns through which a higher force communicates with human beings. His name is Edgar Cayce, and what you are about to hear is not blind faith, it is a map. Cayce became known as the sleeping prophet. He would lie down, close his eyes, and enter a state of trance so deep that doctors and scientists of the time could not explain what was happening to his body at that moment. His breathing changed, his voice changed, and information began to pour from his mouth that no simple man, with the education he had, should have been capable of producing. Accurate medical diagnoses about people he had never seen. Descriptions of treatments that medicine would only confirm decades later. And in the midst of thousands of recorded sessions, a message that repeats like an echo. You are not alone. There is protection. There is guidance. And it is trying to speak to you all the time through signs that the Western mind, trained to distrust the invisible, has been taught to ignore. The central idea behind everything Cayce revealed is simple to state and devastating to truly understand. There is a higher force, an organizing intelligence that guides, protects, and sends constant messages to each person throughout their journey. It is not a distant figure sitting on a throne, oblivious to your suffering. It is something closer to an electric current that runs through every decision, every encounter, every moment of danger, avoided by a hair's breadth. And the reason most people never consciously feel this presence is not because it doesn't exist. It is because no one taught them where to look. You have been trained your whole life to rationalize the extraordinary, to find a logical explanation for everything, to the point where you have lost the ability to recognize when something greater is speaking to you through the most common details of your day. Think for a moment about how many times you felt a tightness in your chest before leaving home, and decided, without knowing exactly why, to take another route. Think about how many times a sudden urge to call someone saved you from discovering terrible news alone. Think about the last time something made you 5 minutes late, 5 irritating minutes, a shoelace that came untied, a key that went missing, and then you discovered that those 5 minutes were exactly what kept you away from a problem you will never know existed. These experiences are not uncommon. They are universal. What is rare is the person who stops, pays attention, and recognizes the pattern behind them. The first group of signs that Cayce identified, and which appears repeatedly in the records of his sessions, involves exactly this type of experience. Last-minute deliverances and intuitions that prove to be correct. These are the moments when danger was inches away and something, an impulse, a pause, a sudden change of plan, pulled you out of the path of a collision before you had time to rationally process why you were doing it. A driver who decides, for no apparent reason, not to cross the intersection on green, and 3 seconds later a car speeding passes right through the spot where he would be. A mother who wakes up in the middle of the night with an inexplicable restlessness and goes to her son's room at the exact moment something was about to go wrong. This is not a statistical coincidence accumulated over billions of random events. According to the perspective Cayce brought, it is direct communication, a silent nudge from an intelligence that sees what you cannot see yet. Intuition in this perspective ceases to be an emotional whim and begins to be treated as a legitimate channel of guidance. It does not shout. It does not send you a message written in the sky. It whispers in the form of a discomfort that has no logical explanation, a sudden urge to change direction, a gut feeling you have learned throughout your life to call bestera and ignore in the name of reason. But the most decisive moments of your story, if you stop to revisit them with honesty, probably were not born from a spreadsheet of pros and cons. They were born from an internal tug you followed, or that you ignored and later regretted not having followed. This tug is, according to this view, the most silent and constant way through which superior protection acts. It does not force your hand, it whispers the direction and waits for you to listen. And it is precisely here, at the point where you begin to acknowledge that perhaps you have never been as alone as you thought, that I want to tell you about something I have prepared with great care for those who are ready to stop just feeling these signs sporadically and start recognizing them day after day with clarity. Many people live their whole lives receiving these warnings and never learn to distinguish them from their own mental noise, and it is exactly this confusion that prevents a person from trusting when they need to the most. If you feel that you have already received signs like these, but never knew for sure if you could trust them, comment below "Eu sou guiado" in the first pinned comment of this video. This small gesture is more than engagement. It is a symbolic commitment to the part of you that already knows, even without proof, that you are not walking alone. Continuing, deliverances and intuitions are only the gateway. There is a second layer of signs, subtler and for many people even more impactful when finally perceived. The people, symbols, and synchronized moments that seem like deliberate messages placed exactly in your path. Have you ever had the experience of thinking intensely about someone you hadn't seen in years, and minutes later that person sends you a message out of nowhere? Have you ever had the feeling that a specific number, 11-11-333-222, insists on appearing to you repeatedly, on the clock, on a car license plate, on a grocery store receipt, at moments that seem too chosen to be random? A mind trained in skepticism will immediately try to convince you that this is confirmation bias, that you are only noticing it more because you are looking for it. And, in part, this is true. But the question that no one asks is, why are you being led to look exactly now? Why does this pattern of attention intensify precisely at the moments you most need guidance, and disappear when life is stable and without big decisions ahead? According to the records of Cayce, the universe, or the greater intelligence that organizes existence, does not communicate only through words or internal voices. It uses the raw material of your daily reality as language. A chance encounter with someone who completely changes the course of a project, a relationship, or a career decision. A book that literally falls from the shelf in front of you, open exactly to the page containing the answer you had been looking for weeks. A conversation overheard unintentionally in a cafe that answers, with surgical precision, a doubt you hadn't even verbalized to anyone. These events in isolation can be dismissed as chance. But when you start tracking the pattern over months and years and realize the frequency and temporal precision with which these happenstances occur exactly at the turning points of your life, it becomes increasingly difficult to sustain the explanation of pure randomness. There is even a term coined outside the context of Cayce, but which describes exactly the same phenomenon he spent his life narrating. Synchronicity, the simultaneous occurrence of events that seem significantly related but have no obvious causal connection between them. The difference is that, while psychology tries to explain this as a phenomenon of the mind projecting meaning where none exists, Cayce's view maintains the opposite. The meaning is there because it was placed there, and the mind that perceives it is only finally paying attention to something that has always been happening around it. This changes the way you should walk through the world. If every person who crosses your path, every number that insists on repeating itself, every coincidence too absurd to be ignored, could be a fragment of a message, then paying attention ceases to be superstition and becomes a form of spiritual literacy. And it was thinking exactly about this, about the real difficulty most people have in distinguishing noise from signal, that I decided to bring this content to you in the most direct way possible. It is not about blindly believing in every coincidence. It is about developing the discernment to recognize when something is being placed in your path on purpose. If you have ever felt that chilling sensation of, "This cannot be a coincidence," and want to learn to trust that instinct without doubting yourself, comment "Eu reconheço os sinais" in the first pinned comment. It is quick, but it is a real step towards stopping the ignoring of what life is trying to show you. Let us move forward, because there is a third type of sign, perhaps the most counterintuitive of all, and one that many people live without ever being able to name correctly. The inexplicable peace that arises exactly in moments when, logically, you should be in a panic. Has it ever happened to you to be in the middle of a crisis, a serious illness in the family, an unexpected layoff, a devastating financial loss, and instead of the complete emotional collapse that the situation would demand, you felt a strange calm, almost incompatible with the gravity of the moment? A serenity that did not come from denial nor from shock, but from something that seemed to come from outside, as if someone had placed an invisible hand on your chest and said without words, "Everything is going to be all right, and even if it doesn't turn out the way you expect, you will not go through this alone." This peace is, according to the vision that Cayce described repeatedly in his sessions, one of the strongest and most direct manifestations of a higher presence acting in a person's life. It is not an absence of pain. People who experience this phenomenon continue to feel the pain, continue to cry, continue to face the real consequences of the crisis. But there exists, along with all of this, a core of internal stability that should not be there, which common emotional logic could not produce on its own. It is as if, in the middle of the most violent storm, there existed a perfectly silent eye, and you somehow had been positioned exactly there. From a biological point of view, you might even try to explain this through the mind's defense mechanisms, protective dissociation, or the neurochemistry of stress. And part of that is probably correct. The human body has real mechanisms for emotional survival, but the purely biological explanation fails to capture the specific quality of this peace. It is not numbness. It is not emotional anesthesia. It has texture. It has presence. It has an almost palpable quality of companionship. People who have gone through devastating losses, terminal diagnoses, and personal catastrophes frequently describe this type of experience with very similar words. "I knew I wasn't alone. I felt as if someone were holding my hand even though no one was physically there. The peace didn't make sense, but it was more real than the fear itself." According to Cayce, this sensation is a direct confirmation, perhaps the most direct of all, that there is a force accompanying every person through their darkest moments, and that this force chooses precisely the hours of greatest despair to become more palpable, because it is exactly in those hours that the person is finally with their guard down enough to feel. Now let's talk about something that most people interpret completely wrong, and which is, perhaps, the hardest sign to accept among all those Cayce described: closed doors as a form of protection. Have you ever lost a job that, at the time, seemed like the end of the world, and years later realized that that firing took you off a path that would have destroyed you in another way? Have you ever been rejected by someone you swore was the one, suffered for entire months because of it, and then, looking back, realized that that relationship would have been a prison disguised as love? Have you ever lost an opportunity that looked perfect on paper, only to discover sometime later that it hid traps that you simply couldn't see at the time? The culture we live in teaches that every closed door is a failure, proof that you aren't good enough, that you did something wrong, that the universe is against you. But the vision that Cayce presents is radically different. Some of the most painful rejections of your life may have been, in fact, protective interventions disguised as disappointment. Not because the pain isn't real, it is, and no one is asking you to pretend that losses don't hurt, but because immediate pain often hides a long-term benefit that only becomes visible with time and distance. Imagine someone walking toward a cliff without knowing there is a cliff there. If that person trips and falls face first 5 meters before the edge, they will feel pain. They will feel angry at having tripped. They will perhaps blame their own bad luck. But that trip was what prevented the real fall. They will never know with absolute certainty what would have happened if they hadn't tripped. But the pattern, when observed repeatedly over an entire lifetime, begins to tell a story different from the story of bad luck. This does not mean that every pain has an evident redemptive purpose, nor that we should romanticize suffering as if it were always a gift in disguise. It just means that the human mind, in the heat of the moment, has a limited capacity to evaluate whether a closed door is a punishment or a rescue, and that the rush to label every disappointment as a cosmic injustice may be preventing you from seeing the care that, according to this view, is behind many of your worst disappointments. Perhaps that door didn't close in your face. Perhaps it closed in front of you, like a protective arm preventing you from crossing a street at the exact moment a speeding car is about to pass. It is precisely at this point, between the pain of a closed door and the peace of understanding that it may have been protection, that many people feel the most urgent need for concrete tools to go through this process with more clarity, without spending entire years stuck in anger or confusion over why things didn't work out the way they wanted. Recognizing this pattern in your own life, looking back and managing to separate what was punishment from what was disguised care, is one of the most liberating exercises that exists, and I really want you to start this exercise today, even while watching this video. If there is a closed door in your life that, looking back now with more distance, you are starting to suspect may have been protection and not punishment, comment "Eu fui protegido" in the first pinned comment. This simple gesture is the first step toward transforming resentment into understanding. Let us move on to the fifth pattern, which Cayce described as one of the most consistent proofs of a greater force acting upon a person's trajectory. Resilience, a sense of purpose, and the feeling, difficult to justify rationally, yet present in practically everyone who has faced repeated hardship, that life itself carries a meaning greater than the sum of its isolated events. Think of someone who has gone through multiple crises, one after another, losses, illnesses, bankruptcies, betrayals, and who, despite everything, kept getting back up. Not because this person was genetically stronger than others, nor because they had some kind of special advantage, but because, somewhere deep down, they felt there was still something waiting for them on the other side, something that justified continuing. This ability to rise again repeatedly, even when the coldest logic would suggest giving up, is interpreted within Cayce's view as direct evidence of spiritual support. It is not just individual willpower, although individual willpower is real and important. It is the combination of this internal strength and something external to it, a sort of current that gently pushes the person back forward whenever they are about to collapse completely. And there is a curious detail in this phenomenon. People who go through the greatest hardships in life, when interviewed years later, often report not just having survived, but having found in the midst of the process a sense of purpose that did not exist before the crisis. It is as if the difficulty, besides testing resilience, also carved a clearer path, revealing in the end something that the person would not have been able to see if life had been easy all along. This sense of purpose does not need to be grand. It does not need to involve saving the world or achieving historical feats. Often it is simple, the quiet certainty that one's own existence has a meaning, even if that meaning is not yet completely revealed. And it is precisely this certainty that, according to Cayce, functions as one of the strongest signs that a greater force is actively present, guiding every step, even the steps that seem, at first glance, purely accidental or tragic. And it is here, at the highest point of this reflection on resilience and purpose, that I need to make a direct invitation to you, because this is the right moment, not a week from now, not when I have time, but now. If you recognize in yourself this capacity to keep rising, but feel you are tired of doing it alone, without a clear compass, comment "Eu tenho proposito" in the first pinned comment right now, before continuing to watch. Do not leave this decision for later. Life rarely waits politely while you postpone the recognition of what you already know to be true about yourself. We have arrived finally at the seventh and last sign that Cayce identified repeatedly throughout his sessions, and which is perhaps the most practical of all because it happens with an impressive frequency as soon as you start paying attention. Finding exactly what is needed at the exact moment it is needed. The right information appearing just when you are lost regarding a decision. The right person entering your life just when you most needed support, advice, or simply company. The right idea appearing out of nowhere, in the middle of the night, solving a problem that you had been trying to solve for weeks with no success at all. The right opportunity knocking at the door exactly when all other doors seem to have closed at the same time. This pattern, when observed with attention throughout an entire life, reveals something remarkable. The timing of these arrivals is rarely random. They do not happen all the time, nor at any given moment. They happen with statistically strange frequency, exactly at the points of greatest need. It is almost as if there were a perfectly calibrated delivery system, one that waits until the exact moment when the person is ready or desperate enough to recognize the value of what is being offered, and only then releases the missing piece of the puzzle. Cayce described this phenomenon repeatedly as one of the clearest and most everyday proofs that there is an intelligence orchestrating the details of human existence, an intelligence that does not operate through spectacular miracles visible to everyone, but through the silent precision of placing the right thing at the right time in the path of the right person. It is worth thinking of a concrete image to better understand this last sign. Imagine a person who, after months of trying to decipher a complex problem alone, comes across, almost by chance, a video, an article, a hallway conversation, which contains exactly the missing piece. She did not look for that specifically. She didn't even know that information existed, and yet it appeared, in the right format, in the right language. At the moment her mind was mature enough to understand it. If this had happened a month earlier, she might not have even paid attention. A month later, it might have been too late. The timing, more than the content itself, is what transforms this type of event into something that feels deliberately orchestrated. And the more you observe your own life with this kind of attention, the more you realize that this pattern is not rare, it is constant. It only became invisible because no one ever taught you to name it as anything other than luck. The great turning point that this video proposed, from beginning to end, was not to convince you that extraordinary coincidences happen once in a while. It was to show you that these 7 signs, the deliverances and intuitions, the synchronized people and symbols, the inexplicable peace, the closed doors as protection, the resilience with purpose, and the precise arrivals at the right moment, are not isolated and disconnected events. They are the same voice, speaking through different channels, repeating in every possible way the same message. You have never been and you will never be completely alone. There is a greater force accompanying every step of your journey, and it is, at this very moment, trying to get your attention through details that you have probably been ignoring for years. Keep these 7 patterns as one keeps a map: the deliverances and intuitions, the synchronized people and symbols, the peace that makes no sense, the doors that close to protect, the resilience that carries purpose, and the precise arrivals at the exact instant. The question that remains is not whether this force exists. The question is whether you will continue living as if it did not exist, dismissing each sign as coincidence, each inexplicable piece as luck, each closed door as a definitive failure. Or if you will, starting today, begin to pay attention for real. Because tomorrow morning you will wake up, and life will go back to sending you these signs, the same way it has been sending them all along. The only thing that changes is whether you will continue sleeping through them, or if you will finally learn to read the language that has always been there waiting for you. The decision is not mine. It never was. It always was, and always will be, entirely yours. Before closing this video, do one last thing. Stop for a second and think of a single moment in your life, just one, where you felt, with absolute clarity, that something greater was taking care of you. It doesn't need to be a spectacular event. It can be something small, silent, almost invisible to anyone else but you. Write that moment in the comments, starting with, "I was guided," and complete it with your own story. Because every time a person acknowledges one of these signs out loud, they are not just sharing a memory. They are, in a way, confirming to themselves and to whoever might be reading that the protection Cayce spent their entire life documenting is not a distant theory. It is real, it is present, and it is, right now, waiting for you to finally learn to see it.